Good evening, welcome. My name is Sebastian Burke. I'm the Director of Corporate Programs at the Council. We're delighted to have all of you here tonight for a full house and an exciting discussion. And we're also delighted to welcome our panelists tonight. Randall Barker, Aaron Mandell, Virginia Ursin, and our moderator, Dave Donnan. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Kearney, for sponsoring this event. Thank you very much. Please note that this conversation is on the record, but feel free to use social media. And the video recording will be available online shortly after the end. But also please remember to silence your phones. Before we start, I'd like to highlight a few of our upcoming programs. We have a lot of exciting programs coming up in our spring season, but just to highlight a few. On February 2nd, we have a fantastic panel on COP21, the implications after the Paris talks. On February 4th, as part of our Global Economy series, we have Professors Tyler Cohen and Randy Krosner from the University of Chicago on the future of money. And on February 8th, we have Isaac Stonefish on China's foreign policy. And as I mentioned, we have a lot of other programs on our website, so please check the website. I will rejoin to moderate the Q&A portion, but before we begin, I'd like to welcome to the stage to introduce our panelists, Mr. Mike Hales. He is a partner at Kearney and a valued board member of the Chicago Council. So please welcome Mr. Mike Hales.
Thanks, Sebastian, and thank you all for taking the time to join us this evening. It's my pleasure to work with the Council on this event. I've been working with them for almost 2 decades, 20 years, and with Kearney for 30. We want to thank the Council and the panelists here for teaming with us on this forum. We're very excited about the opportunity to really fundamentally look at one question, which is how is the world going to produce 70% more food so that by the year 2050, it can feed 10 billion people? So we know that meeting this type of challenge will require change across the value chain for making food, from the farmers all the way to the companies, and the need to use innovation and disruptive technologies like big data, robotics, genetics, and the Internet of Things to find a way to meet that type of challenge. As we do this, we have to understand how to use those technologies in a way that can be efficient and effective and acceptable to some of our social mores. And what can the role of business be in applying these technologies? Tonight we're fortunate to have such a great set of panelists to join us who are all experts in these matters. You have their biographies on your chairs, but let me just quickly give you some highlights of their achievements. First, Randall Barker, who's the Managing Director of Business Development at FarmLink. He helps guide their development of new tools and identify new ways for organizations to utilize technology and data analysis. Prior to joining FarmLink in 2014, he spent nearly a decade at Monsanto, leading their global platforms for a number of products. Second, we have Aaron Mandell, who's co-founded several emerging energy and water companies, including WaterFX, HydroRevolution, Oasis, and Great Point. His innovative work has been featured in Forbes, National Geographic, and many other publications. He's a visiting scientist at MIT and Tel Aviv University and serves on the board of advisors for the University of Vermont College of Engineering and Math. Third, we have Dr. Virginia Ursin. She has a leading role in Monsanto's Biotechnology Prospecting and Competitive Intelligence organization, where she helps to develop and identify new technologies. Since joining Monsanto, she's held a variety of scientific and project leadership roles supporting their biotechnology products. She's held postdoctoral positions at the USDA Plant Gene Expression Center and Calgene, Inc. Lastly, our moderator, Dave Donnan, is currently a partner at Kearney, leading our global food and beverage sector. Dave's an expert in corporate strategy and supply chain across the food and beverage industry. He's worked extensively in leadership positions at several food and retail companies, as well as for not-for-profit organizations. With that, let's join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists.
So good evening, everyone. My name's Dave Donnan. Welcome you all here, and going to be an interesting evening as we discuss a variety of the aspects of agriculture, innovation, food technologies. As Mike mentioned, we've got another 3 billion people coming online in the next 30 years. But it's more than just more mouths to feed. We're also seeing a fundamental shift in diets around the world. Recognizing and as a population of the world, we're becoming more prosperous. And as a result, we're looking for higher processed foods and more proteins. And so if you add up all the different numbers of the amount of proteins we need, the processed and prepared foods, we're going to have to more than double our agricultural productivity. And that's the real challenge. Because at the same time we need to do this, we have restraints in water, land resources, environmental, sustainability issues, all putting headwinds to us as well. So today, even though we're seeing farming techniques improving, if we really look at, on our analysis of a historical yield of corn, rice, wheat, and soy, the 4 crops that account for about 2/3 of the globally harvested food, we're only seeing about a 38 to 60% increase by 2050 based on current productivity and yield improvements. That's not enough to meet that doubling of demand. And so the big question is, can technology provide a path forward? And that's what we hopefully to get through in this conversation. Technology is waking up to this agricultural revolution. Funding from Silicon Valley startups in food and agriculture sector have gone up 60% compounded annual growth rate from 400 million in 2010 to 4.2 billion in 2015. And according to the USDA, there's 60,000 high-skilled agricultural jobs are needed, yet only 35,000 graduates are available to fill them. So is agriculture the next Silicon Valley? Innovations in digital technologies such as advanced data analytics, predictive modeling, robotics are making farms more efficient. Biotechnology advances in genetic engineering and the new CRISPR tools will help us create better and more abundant foods. And process innovations such as precision farming, vertical crops, and hydroponics and aquaponics are allowing us to grow food where we never could grow food before. So what will the breakthrough innovations be? How will we better utilize our limited land resources, water resources? Will consumers accept new agriculture technologies? And how do we make these innovations available to that bottom of the pyramid, the less economically secure? So these are some of the questions that hopefully the panel will go through in the next hour. So I'd like each one of the panelists just to give a brief introduction and some of their perspectives. And I'd like to start with Aaron. And if you could just give a brief background on yourself and some perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. Is my mic on? Everybody can hear me? I'm Aaron Mandell. I'm the founder and chairman of WaterFX. We're a startup company based in the Bay Area near Silicon Valley, focused around innovation in sustainable water production. So the way I got into this, I'm actually originally from the East Coast, but several years back I took a trip to the West Coast of California, and on this particular trip, I drove down into the Central Valley, and this is actually the first time I'd ever really been to the Central Valley, and this is one of the most productive, food growing areas in the entire world. And actually, the guys I was with kind of joke because I had my loafers on, and this is like Ford F-150, boot country. But on this particular trip, I was introduced to a water district that was serving 100,000 acres of farmland in the Central Valley, and this was before Governor Brown had declared an emergency drought in California. And I remember just being absolutely blown away with the magnitude of the problem that we were facing. And I remember thinking that, this isn't just a water problem in California, this is a problem for the United States, because this is where an enormous percentage of our fruits, nuts, and vegetables come from, including a whole number of other agricultural products. And so being sort of a tech guy, an innovation guy, I left that trip thinking that we really need to focus on kind of redesigning the entire sustainable water model from the ground up. And so that's basically what I did. I moved my whole family out to California, started the company, and we really focused on trying to leverage what's happening in the energy industry and apply it to water. Because right now, the energy industry is going through a massive revolution. We are drastically changing how we generate and use energy. And at the end of the day, if you think about water, water actually is just a form of energy. It takes energy to move water, to treat water, to create water. And so if we have a sustainable, affordable, scalable source of energy, we can actually produce as much water as we need, even more water than we need. And Israel is actually a great example of that. Israel went from completely water scarce, and in 20 years, by focusing on technology and innovation, they now actually produce a surplus of water. They actually sell water to neighboring countries. So it is actually possible to innovate our way to sustainable water production. And so what we're focused on is a particular type of technology called solar desalination. So we're using solar energy as the energy source to separate fresh water from salt water. And we think if we can do that affordably and sustainably and in a scalable way, we can actually create a new source of water in the West. And so we have a demonstration project now called HydroRevolution that we're in the process of scaling up to a commercial facility.
Great, thank you, Aaron. Virginia.
Hi, I'm Ginny Ursin. As you heard in the introduction, I'm with Monsanto. I've actually spent my entire career in ag biotech. I started with what at the time was a startup called Calgene, which was responsible for putting the first genetically engineered whole food on the market, and I had worked on that actually through to the point where Monsanto acquired us. I am passionate about genetics, about the technologies that we can use to advance agricultural productivity. Just as sort of some perspective, I think the themes that were brought up in the introduction about the global challenges with population, with changes in arable land, with climate change, agriculture is right in the crosshairs of that. And there's no question that agricultural productivity, it's not enough just to say it needs to increase. It really has to fundamentally change. So today, all the food that's produced for the world is produced on a land mass about the size of South America. Food productivity has to double. We simply can't replicate South America. Not only is the land not available, the inputs, it's just impossible. And so, innovation is absolutely essential in rethinking the entire food chain and every part of it. Monsanto is focused specifically on innovations on farm for farmers. So there are innovations needed, I think, as everyone can imagine, through not only the seeds that go in the ground, how the crops are managed, but what happens to those crops after they're harvested. Food waste is a huge issue. Transportation of food. We're focused really on what happens on the farm and providing solutions to farmers, and that's in the form of seeds, what we call seeds and traits. So these are seeds that are bred through state-of-the-art molecular breeding techniques paired with traits, which is the genetic engineering aspect. These seeds are then combined with state-of-the-art biologics and chemistries so that when the farmer plants the seed, the risk of a failure has been diminished significantly. We then provide services through big data to help farmers manage these crops. And we really are in a new, so the green revolution happened between the 40s and the 60s. Well, we have a new green revolution. It's really a green data revolution. And big data, our ability to analyze data and predictive analytics are fundamentally changing how farmers farm. And at this point, tractors are I think they're outpacing self-driving cars in terms of the technology. The predictive analytics are allowing us to basically breed plants in silico. Farmers can then take seed that has been bred for specific types of soil. Their tractors know what seed to put in where, and then the analytics will help the farmers with the management of that. It's part of the solution. I think what needs to happen is collaboration across everybody who is participating in the issue of sustainable food production, food safety, and food security across the world.
Okay, thank you. Randall.
Yeah, so my background, I'm originally from Canada, farm background, been an Aggie my whole career in life, and as Virginia was talking about, you see this evolution, and it's changed a lot. When I got in, it was about combinatorial chemistry, and I said, well, that's not that interesting, so I was on biotechnology and genetics, and I got to be part of that, and then you say GPS and connectivity starting, you see molecular breeding, and it all accelerates. Where we're at FarmLink is it's a data science problem. We get to solve it all now. but it's super complex. So the good news is we have the vision. The hard part is bringing the parts together. So what we've done at FarmLink is we've had a fleet of combines for 15 years. We really started collecting data 7 years ago and connected them all, engineered our own wireless boxes, and really focused on collecting high quality yield data. And reverse engineered then from that yield observation, the weather and land. So what can we expect from land in the US, broad-based across 26 states that we've done this. And the so what is when you get that platform, what we've created is something that you can iterate against and solve problems. So we've delivered things that allow farmers to understand their yield versus potential, looking at grain marketing solutions, right? If I can understand how the weather impacts the market, we can help a farmer know when they should market their grain. And the other part that's really a burgeoning opportunity is serving companies who essentially need data science SWAT teams to solve these things because it's super complex. So we see not only living the future as a startup, we really do believe and see an evolution of, we hear about the Internet of Things, 26 billion connected things by 2020. Obviously not all in ag, but connected is great. It doesn't mean that you can work with it. So there's a lot of bumpy parts along the way. Just because the data exists or it's in different systems, we have a long way to go to get it in a manageable state. But when I think about the representation of this panel, and you could add probably about a dozen more, it's really about thinking how can we solve across things. There's an obvious convergence about all these technologies that can be connected and solved for in a data science approach. That's a nice word, at least in agriculture, is taking this complexity of biology, weather, and math and making it work. We can get to these really cool solutions, and I think that's critical to creating change.
Okay, good. Thank you, Randall. So my first question is really one of, we're seeing all of this rapid acceleration of technology and innovation, but it seems like a daunting task to be able to, again, feed that many more people with limited resources and actually dwindling resources in many cases. So I'll start with you, Randall. What do you see as the breakthrough that's probably going to occur in the next 5 to 10 years that you think is not there yet, but is something that you're hoping is going to be something that'll help break through this logjam, I guess?
Yeah, so part of it is, driving the productivity, right? We have to get more off the same or less footprint. But what I see from a tool standpoint falls in this, connectivity knowledge base. And, there was a recent publication or article that said, 26, 27% of the land in Iowa might not be profitable this year. Don't know whether that's accurate or not. We're actually doing the analytics to check it. But you go, if that's true, then that means if it's not economically viable, then we probably shouldn't be farming that land. So then the key is to actually work backwards and say, on the land we should farm, how can we drive the intensity? And I think that's where it comes back to critical tools like genetics and understanding what the product's practices is going to be, and how should we manage it sustainably? Because this trick of, okay, we shouldn't farm marginal land. And if you're going to intensify the other land, you have to look at it very holistically. And we have to have smart technologies and sensors to say, okay, if we're upping the intensity to reduce our footprint, then we also have to reduce the impact. You can't just throw more at it and take more off. We have to systematically come up with sensors, tools to make sure that we're being sustainable with water, with fertility, nitrates in plants. And that's a good point about, right now, commodity prices are very low. Farmers are not making any money. Agricultural input companies are not making any money. So although the technology is there, are we going to be able to afford it? Aaron, on your point, desalinization technology has been around a while, and the reason it's not as pervasive as it should be is because it's economically difficult.
No, you're absolutely right. And so I draw the analogy again to the energy sector. When rooftop solar first came out, I think it was something like $100,000 to put a rooftop panel on your house. Nobody wants to pay that. Even now today, it's probably like $10,000, and people still don't want to pay that. But what's happened is that companies have stepped in with new business models where you no longer have to own the equipment. You don't have to operate it yourself. You simply sign up with SolarCity and you get cheaper, more sustainable energy, for a long period of time. And so our model is actually to try and replicate that, to do the same thing for water that those companies have done for energy, where farmers don't have to put up any of the costs to adopt a sustainable water system. But you're absolutely right. They do not want to put up the money to convert themselves over from the way they get water today to something as technologically innovative as that.
Okay. Virginia, on your point as well with Monsanto, I mean, you're probably facing the same thing. As you've got a lot of great ideas, technologies, innovations, but can anybody afford them?
Well, we're definitely in it for the long haul. And agriculture, as everyone who's in agriculture knows, is very cyclical. And today's headwinds are will be tailwinds. And when you look at the long-term trends of supply and demand, we are investing for the future. I did want to make a comment, maybe a follow-on to Randall's comment. Every year, when all the corn is harvested, the USDA publishes the highest yielding corn.
Yes.
This year, it was over 500 bushels. The average yield was 128, do you remember? 168 bushels.
It's a little higher, but
the potential just in the agronomic practices and the genetic, the opportunity in bringing every stalk of corn, every seed that's planted to that theoretical maximum is something that is available to us now. It's not magic. It is the type of stuff FarmLink is doing. It is the type of stuff we're doing, matching the genotype to that piece of soil it's in and giving that seed, that soybean, that corn, that rice, that cotton plant, every opportunity to achieve its maximum potential. And of course, doing so without just throwing more nitrogen at it.
Right.
But when you look at those types of statistics, there's a huge opportunity there.
But not all land is going to be able to be capable of doing 500 bushels per acre, is it?
Well, why not? Why can't the genetic potential be maximized for a piece of ground?
And that's the goal.
When we can breed in silico and understand that interaction between the genome and the environment, theoretically that is possible.
Okay. So from your perspective, Randall, on the, where do you see as the biggest barriers right now for you and the whole area in data analytics? I mean, there's obviously a lot of press about it, but what's holding it back?
yeah. So you can throw in the economic headwinds. Those are all the time in agriculture. Any commodity cycle goes up and down.
Yes, that's true.
And everyone feels bad when it's bad and good when it's good. What's really the barrier, I had the opportunity to see lots of technologies come to agriculture, and it usually comes down to, is there a clear economic benefit or convenience? Is it repeatable and reliable? And is it simple to use? And when you look at those three things, gee, that's the basic adoption of anything. But in agriculture, you have a really fragmented group of people, right? Farmers are all a whole bunch of entrepreneurs everywhere. You have a whole bunch of businesses serving them. It's really slow in trying to get that, in place so that it's right at the beginning of that curve. So adoption is difficult. Plus, it's a very complex, fragmented issue to solve how you connect all that data. So I think it's a real barrier, and it will be worked through, because you look at the investment and energy being put behind it. It always makes the difference. I'm not going to lie that when you throw money at things and put effort, you do get through it, but it is difficult.
Okay. So, speaking of headwinds as well, in the whole area of genetics, I mean, obviously, the headwind of consumer acceptance, and how do we get around that? I mean, there seems to be more perception than the science.
Yeah, clearly that's sort of the $6 million or $60 million or $600 million question. Yeah. And it's such an interesting conflict between the adoption by farmers, who you would not find a farmer who's grown biotech crops, and it doesn't matter who sold them the seed, that will give up that technology. And it's, in the US, where some 80% of the acres are biotech, we still have the safest food supply in the world. The adoption globally, there are 18 million farmers growing biotech crops, 90% of which are in the developing world, are smallholder farmers. And this technology has made agriculture profitable. It has decreased problems with pesticide poisoning. So we have to solve it because the technology, the genie can't go back in the bottle. We cannot go back to agricultural practices that will basically increase the footprint of agriculture. We all acknowledge we have to decrease the footprint, and that is sustainable intensification. You can call it anything you want,
Yeah.
and genetic optimization is just, it's an essential part of that.
But consumer perception is hard to change, as we see with cage-free eggs and antibiotics-free and everybody going on their gluten-free diets. So, okay. So Aaron, my question to you is, both Virginia and Randall are talking about how to get better yields from available land, by either using big data, by using better use of crops, et cetera. How about the reverse, where we get crops where land doesn't exist? So hydroponics and agroponics, and your desalinization technology can open up a whole new world of growing areas.
Yeah, so crops, absolutely right. So solar desalination, in theory, you could grow crops in the desert, right? I mean, that's sort of the holy grail. But in the world that we live in, that we're focused on right now, it's actually just growing crops in areas that used to have crops. Mm-hmm. So right now in California, the average farm in the Central Valley is at 30 to 50% fallowed because of the water situation. So for the farmers we're dealing with, it's actually not about optimizing production, it's about actually getting back into production. And so we're dealing with a lot of farmers that are having difficulty just servicing their debt and their operations because their revenue is basically cut in half based on the water supply. Mm-hmm. So it's going to take a long time, and the project that we're working on right now is obviously a drop in the bucket, but the point is actually shifting to a new model, to a new source of water that can sort of complement the existing water system in the western U.S.
Yeah, because I could see where being able to get into the new areas of land that are not being fully utilized today opens up the whole world, because there you can start getting into sub-Saharan Africa, you can get into Asia and South Asia, into new models as well. Yeah. So Aaron, Randall, we talked about big data from a kind of a North American perspective. I mean, one of the big innovations or the big breakthroughs, it seems to be, is mobile cellular technology being used in India and Africa to basically bring farmers together. I know there's one example in India right now where 5 million farmers share best practices using videos on their cell phones or their shared cell phones or whatever they're using. So.
It's actually a great example of leapfrogging, right? Where it's not a high-intensity Illinois precision ag thing. If you want to see intensive ag, this is a great state to be in. But you go abroad, like you say, India, there's a leapfrog there, and you can go steps further, because it's not just communication, which is the foundation, but now you're tracking behavior. You can capture images, you can use satellite, you can use remote imaging, you can build infrastructures, drones going over Tanzania, figuring out which varieties of sweet potato are there. I mean, those things really do exist, and it's a matter of intensity and using them to solve an objective. But I think it bears great promise. In fact, I would say this data science and connectivity has a greater lift for someone who's producing at 20% of the US from a yield perspective. They can move up really quickly. Mm-hmm. Going from 350 bushels, if I'm a great farmer, to 500 is really tough. To go from 20 to 100 is much simpler. So I think there's great opportunity to bring information and I think solutions, because they just don't know what to do, as well as infrastructure, economics to actually be able to pay for stuff and trade and sell your grain.
Yeah, I know. I met up with the CEO of the Ethiopian Coffee Commodity Exchange, and the biggest breakthrough for them was not about growing coffee, but it was about trading coffee. So each of the smallhold farmers would have their coffee, and then they would take it to market and sell it to the local broker, who would then consolidate it and sell it to the next one, the next one. Now they were able to actually go on with their mobile and see what the best price was, which village to take it to, and when to take it to it. And so all of a sudden, the market became much more fluid, much more open to negotiations and higher profitability for the farmers as well. So
that's something that actually is needed in water as well.
There's
no fluid trading water market in California.
Is that
basically,
a pun?
if you want to buy water from someone else, you kind of have to know someone that knows someone, and there's no central place where you can go and say, okay, I've got 10,000 acre feet that I'm not going to use this year.
Well, I think the arcane water rights are
Oh, yeah.
making that just so challenging that farmers would rather dump the water.
So that's an interesting component, though. So is anyone working on this, on kind of setting up a water market?
You said you saw.
There is a startup, and WaterWise, they've actually had several press releases recently that is trying to set up a water exchange, a market that is like any other commodity. And,
Whereabouts are they located?
I met them at a startup exchange conference at MIT. I think he's focusing on Texas as his first, because actually, and the water going into energy production and mining is one of the areas that he's focused on right now, less so than actually agriculture, even though ultimately it'll all be part of a robust market. How that can ultimately impact the legislation, the types of things that are needed to bust some of these
monopolies?
Is an open question.
Speaking of startups, are there any Agtech unicorns out there? Any companies that you see that are going to be high valuation? We can't give any recommendations, by the way, but just companies that you're watching, things that you're seeing.
I'm trying to think. I mean, Agtech and food tech right now in Silicon Valley is super hot. I mean, you know, meatless meat, you know, eggless mayo, drones, big data.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to think.
It's cool again to be in agriculture, right?
It is definitely cool. And yeah, I mean, and these are, you know, venture capitalists that invested in Facebook and Uber and Airbnb. They are now investing in these food and ag tech companies. So that's a big deal. So I think it's actually sexy now, and you're going to see a lot of, you know, top engineering talent out of MIT and Stanford and other great universities going into these fields. But trying to think if there's any actual unicorns out there.
We clearly thought Climate Corp was one when we did that acquisition.
Yes.
And Monsanto's done a lot of acquisitions. I'm a product of one, and I think this one was, we'll look back in a decade or more and see this as absolutely brilliant. And the analytics they bring is and we've actually, it's interesting, they've really focused, they've gotten out of insurance, which they were in, and we've actually even gotten out of tractors. I think we sold that to Deere, and we're really focused on the analytics.
Okay.
And it's beyond that, I don't know.
Randall, how about you?
I'm not sure I believe in unicorns, but I think there's some really strong horses, right? And you might confuse them with a unicorn. But I think what it's really setting up is specialization on a problem and then solving a problem. And inevitably, you get both collaboration and consolidation. I think what's really interesting is it's not in the domain of the incumbents. And you know, it's not only Monsanto or John Deere or the largest companies. It's the smartest idea that is pursued and invested in. And I think that is exciting because that's when you actually get creativity that is unencumbered. It's someone as a founder or says this needs to be solved, and they go through it, and then it finds its home in a larger ecosystem. So I think that's the best part is there's maybe unicorns everywhere solving cool problems.
So whether, you know, if you look again going forward 10 years or so, what's going to be the skill set needed by a farmer?
Farmers, wow. They will be much more the chief everything officer, but they definitely will be more technified. You already see it today, and you see disparity between, you know, older generation farmers who are going, I'm not adopting anything because I'm done in 5 years, to the younger ones that, you know, they are connected through everything. Right now they have a dearth of too much tools and information, but they are going to be simplified, and they're going to be very, you know, really economically, financially oriented and understand the sustainability of their operation. So it'll change from, you know, when I grew up to how do you identify, plant, drive, don't take out a fence post, you know, don't do anything stupid farming, to very sophisticated understanding of a business.
Yeah, I was just going to add that the biggest issue we have is that, you know, most farmers are pretty old school, and the older generation, you know, they're very reluctant to buy a piece of sustainable water equipment because, you know, this is not how they get water, and, you know, El Nino's coming and they can smell it in the air, it's going to rain. But the younger generation is absolutely technology focused. I mean, these are a totally different breed of farmer, and those are the people that I think are going to begin adopting these new systems.
Okay, good. And you're seeing the same thing, and you're probably even trying to hire some of these people as well.
Yeah, the next generation, the old school farmers' kids are going to MIT and getting engineering degrees, and they're inventing equipment, they're patenting their equipment, and it's really quite amazing. Which certainly does speak to the issue of now how do we make the systems compatible with the systems that individual farmers are developing for their land, and that that remains to be solved.
Well, it's going to be about connecting them all together, having a common language, and a common OS for them as well.
Yep, absolutely.
So one of the ones that gets a lot of press, anyways, and whether it's viable or not, is this whole area of vertical farming, urban farming. And 60% of the U.S. population is going to be in urban settings, within the next 10, 15, 20 years. Danny Meyer and other restaurateurs are putting, leaf crops on their roofs so they can get really fresh lettuce. Is this something that's more of a media, or do you think there's real economics behind, farming in a city like this by putting together vertical farms, indoor farms, rooftop farms, that are really close to the consumption as well?
Right now, the issue I have with it is that it's primarily catering to high-end restaurants, leafy greens that are not high nutrition density. And I think if vertical agriculture is really going to help with sustainable nutrition, food security, it's got to shift away from microgreens into food that is nutritionally dense. And it remains to be seen. Those are certainly harder to grow than lettuce and basil.
Right.
And you see, it's not a new concept. There's enclosed production all across, high intensity in many places in the U.S. and Europe, and you fly over and you go, what are all those things? Well, they're greenhouses growing tomatoes and lettuce and everything else. So that can be done, but that footprint, well, you get a huge yield bump, as the point being, whether it's vertical greenhouse or a flat one, it's intensive and creates high value product that's predominantly a luxury good. That can be pretty valuable, both in combination with intensification in regular agricultural land. I think there's just been challenges in trying to figure out how to make it economical and deal with now that we have the production, what about wastewater in a city? How do we deal with that? How do we recycle it? How do we distribute all this stuff out of this? Buildings are not great to be farms yet, but they'll figure it out.
Yeah, and as I said, it's probably going to be specific crops, whether it's herbs or microgreens or things like that to start, but will eventually corn be grown indoors?
I think if it is going to be, then there needs to be the breeding for it. And but when you think about if you have to throw on a light switch versus the free source of energy, the economics are very different.
Yeah, that's right.
And but there are places in very, very dry areas. That's the only
way you
option.
can go. And water won't be free anymore because Aaron will be putting up his water exchange. So.
Yeah, and I've seen not indoor greenhouses, but there's been a lot of innovation in outdoor greenhouses where they can actually reduce the water consumption by a factor of 10 and actually have 10 times the yield in these outdoor controlled greenhouses.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Israel is on the leading edge of that. Just filters, plastics that filter some wavelengths and let others through can have a profound effect on yield, as well as have impacts on insects can't see plants that are where some certain wavelengths are filtered out. And so there's innovation needs to happen everywhere. It needs to be the right innovation for the right, when we're really talking about sustainable food and food security, it's beyond microgreens, but I don't mean to belittle that. You need to start there, but I think it is possible that some more nutrient dense, it may not look like the corn that we're used to seeing, but it's possible.
So, a question, going back to this consumer acceptance of genetics, most of the work on GMOs, et cetera, focused on, I guess, input traits, making farmers, the economics of farming. And there's only been a few that we know of for consumer traits, whether it's the golden rice or whatever. Do you see that shifting at all, or is it still going to focus more on farmer economics, do you think, going forward?
This is something I've thought about a lot. And early in my career, I actually worked on a nutritional trait. I developed a soybean that was high in omega-3 fatty acids, which could be a replacement for omega-3s harvested from the ocean, which is, as we all know, not sustainable. But my thinking has really changed on whether the issues we're facing now have anything to do with really what the traits are. There are some very fundamental philosophical issues about the technology, and that golden rice has not been accepted by some of the activist groups, that they've dug up the trials. This is something that can save hundreds of millions of lives. And so it really, you know, maybe 10 years ago it could have changed some of the dialogue, but the way I look at it is being able to increase agricultural sustainability. A huge percentage of greenhouse gas comes from agriculture. No-till agriculture allows carbon to be sequestered in the soil instead of released, or other greenhouse gases through tilling. That is enabled fundamentally by some of the herbicide-resistant crops. And so I think what I would like to see is people think a little differently about what's in it for them, and everyone benefits from sustainable agriculture and food security, global food security. And I know food is sacred, and it's very hard to, you know, people's issues, their concerns and their fears for them are very, very real.
Right.
And I think the challenge is trying to shift the conversation, and genetics is one solution. It is one tool of many, many, many. Farmers are going to need very, very full toolboxes in order to continue to produce the food that people want to eat. I think if more people walked on farms, more people touched food while it was growing, talked to farmers, understood what this technology can do, I think there would be different conversations.
Randall, you were going to say?
I can't help but comment. I think it's a critical tool in the toolbox. If you look at the unpredictability in the future, and if you think about climate change and carbon sequestration, you know, I think people always look at it as the existing biotech, and to take it out of the toolbox foregoes such a valuable tool. If I think of health and healthcare in humans, how far that's gone and continues to go, and how important a tool it is, and we use it in our own body, it's hard for me to believe why we would take that out of a toolbox for our food production.
Kind of building on that consumer theme, again, Randall, the question is on the data, you know, this whole idea of transparency back and being able to understand where it was grown, how it was grown, you know, what was used on a grown. Is that data becoming more and more available throughout the food processing industry?
But I think it's quite possible. That's the great part. So the best thing about all this connectivity and data collection is much of the energy is focused on making things passive to the user, right? So it's collecting a whole bunch of information that we don't rely on humans to enter, right? So and if we can get to that point using Internet of Things and connectivity and protocols and process, I think everyone will benefit, because I don't think anyone doesn't want to be transparent. It's just the value of being transparent hasn't existed. Yeah. And if we can make it easy, then everyone benefits.
Okay. So I'm going to do one more question, then we're going to open it up to you, the audience, so that you can ask questions as well. So get your questions ready, and Sebastian will take them. So the last question is just going to be one of, what do you see as sort of the gaps right now in the entire agriculture system that are not being addressed by agriculture? And is this something that industry needs to take a bigger role in, government needs to take a bigger role in, consumers? How, you know, is there some area that you feel is not getting the attention it should get?
Yeah, I'll start. So I think, you know, right now, when you look at the water system in the Western United States, it's a subsidized water system. So, and there's a reason for that. It's good that we subsidize water, because it's going to our food production and to consumption. But I think we need to do a lot more to promote sustainable water use. And right now, I think in California especially, there's not the same attention on driving innovation and moving us away from the system that we have now that you're seeing in other industries like energy. And I think if you look at energy again, I mean, there's tremendous incentives in place to get people to adopt solar energy. Community choice aggregators that allow you to decide where your energy comes from. I want to buy solar energy, I want to buy wind or hydro. That same thing does not exist in water, and it needs to. We need to be able to actually provide incentives for farmers to reuse, for farmers to look at alternative water sources, and give them incentives to actually put that water back into the system and get paid for it.
Okay, so on the whole incentives and just motivations to change as well.
Yep.
Ginny?
I actually have to really agree with that. It is, water is a, I don't think there's really a bigger issue right now in agriculture and probably global, but it's clearly within the U.S. I can't really come up with anything else. I think there is, I think moving towards transparent systems so people can understand what has gone into the production of the food through its entire life cycle. Democratization of that data is very, very important. I think everyone benefits from that. I think we're moving in that direction, and I don't have any other big gaps.
Yeah, I guess I got the benefit of answering last. I think it was mentioned by Ginny that it's people. Getting the right people to run this industry is going to be critical. So I think we have a lot of energy, but it's a big industry. And I think the other piece that's missing is, the ability to communicate interdependency. It's like energy. It's like a lot of other businesses. It's environmentally interdependent. It happens out there and it affects everyone on the globe, and it's very difficult to get beyond it's farmers farming. And I assume they're bad. It's an interesting dialogue, but if you think about the science behind it, of water, of weather, of drought, our climate change, carbon, it's a big discussion that has to go far beyond farmers.
Okay, good. So Sebastian?
Fascinating. So we have about 25 minutes or so for questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Wait for my colleagues. Wait for me to call on you, and wait for my colleagues to bring you the microphone. And please make sure you have a question and not a comment.
There you go.
Okay, we have one over here in front. That's but.
Oh, there we go.
I'll go first. I have two questions. Could you speak about the logistics of getting the product, the agriculture, the food, from where it's grown to where it's consumed on a global basis? Because sometimes there's scarcities in certain areas. Second question I have, I know I'm not allowed to have two questions, but none of those are comments, just questions. Is the economies of scale going to be so great that the small farmers, especially in the United States, are not going to be able to continue farming economically?
Okay, so we want to start with the one about getting the food to the place in the world, or on the economic side? I'll let you have a choice. So, who would like to go?
I mean, I can start with the issue of what happens to food after it's grown it's a tremendous issue. I think it's perhaps a little naive to think the whole issue of food security can be solved with figuring out how to get food from point A to point B. But food, sometimes it's our 40% of food that's produced is lost before it reaches the market, or it reaches a dinner plate. And we have got to innovate around that. And as I think each of us has said, we see agriculture it's a system that has many, many parts, and the connectivity between those parts is going to be essential. And it does need to be solved. The issue of economies, I don't think maybe Randall would like to address that.
Well, yeah, I'm probably on the same one, but I'm going to go right to economies. If you think about distribution, the infrastructure to get stuff to where we want it to go, for the most part, is there. You can get it from continent to continent. In fact, you can get it into a country. What the problem is economics. The ability to pay, a system, and infrastructure in a marketplace. That's where, if you think back to development of societies, agrarian societies always develop first. And if you can grow and sustain your own food in a local market, then those other issues start to take care of themselves. And then on the small farmer, it's a big world. Small farmers will always exist, and small is a relative term. We have great disparity. Ukraine has massive farmers and tiny farmers, and U.S. has average farmers, big farmers, small farmers. So it usually comes down to desire and economics. Yeah.
over here in the first
I
row.
just wanted to add a comment on the small farm economics as well. I mean, there's a whole movement right now to the small farm as being artisanal, organic, local. And some of the tools we're talking about here are actually quite adaptable to drone technology, precision farming. You don't have to be a huge farm to use them. And so it actually may give some benefit to a small farmer. Now, the economics are not going to make sense, but if they do have some differentiation in the type of product they produce, then obviously there's an advantage. So.
Lisa, front row.
Thank you. Lisa Moon with the Global Food Banking Network. I really want to commend Dave and the panel for just talking about the challenges that we're facing related to food security. My question actually builds off what his was, that we talked a lot about production-driven solutions, but for that, as much as 1/3, maybe even more, of food that is lost or wasted, thrown away, what type of innovation can we expect to see around that, and what role does redistribution of that food play? Thanks.
Can I start? Because I've actually doing work with Feeding America on the whole area of waste recovery. And so you look at waste on the farm, which is non-harvested, in transportation, in manufacturing, and the biggest waste is all of our waste called plate waste, where we don't eat what our eyes are bigger than our stomach. So, I mean, some of the innovation coming up is just simple things like being able to do gleaning in the farms and being able to take product that the machines can't pick and juice it. So oranges that aren't picked, rather than letting them rot, so how do we pick them, using volunteer labor or whatever, and then take it into juicing plants? Or it could be as simple as we have best before dates on our food. What if we had a donate before date as well? And so little things that can just nudge the system a bit can be very helpful. So, Donell?
I forgot what I was going to say. Listening to you. Oh, I know. So there is a lot of innovation. It's interesting. There's a lab at MIT, and it's actually out of the Institute for Soldier Nanotechnology, where they develop sensors for in-field, battlefield, to detect explosives and other things. Well, one of the professors is modifying that technology to detect a gas that plants give off called ethylene, which ethylene helps plants ripen, but ethylene will also accelerate decay. And so he's developing these sensors to go into refrigerators, into trucks, labels on food in the supermarket. And they cost pennies each. And the outcome will be less spoilage. Use this, open your vegetable drawer. Well, I better use this head of lettuce now because the sensors now turn color. And so there is innovation out there, but I think and even he, as he's trying to develop this technology, and the company's called C2 Sense, because ethylene is C2H4, is the connectedness of the food chain from on-farm, where our breeders might want to use it to optimize breeding for ripening date, but then it would need to go into the truck. Well, we have nothing to do with trucking, and the trucking industry has nothing to do with the refrigerator company that may have these sensors built into the drawer, or the packaging company that may be able to build these sensors into.
So connecting them all is important.
Connecting them all.
Yeah.
We have one here in the front, please. Third row, yeah.
Don't you think that practically we are producing enough for us to live, but much of the production is running through feeding the animal? So I think that maybe we should work more on educating people to eat less meat, even if And don't you think that this might be a solution for reducing the footprint for the land?
Well, I think most people are surprised when I tell them that 90% of the corn grown in the U.S. is for feed, not food.
Feed and fuel.
And that is feed so people can have dairy and meat. Clearly, if people ate less meat globally, there would be less of a demand, but we see the opposite happening as middle classes emerge in China and India. Meat and protein is one of the things that is added to the diet. I don't know what a solution is to that. but it is one of the drivers of this needing to double agricultural production is the increased protein consumption, animal protein consumption that is anticipated.
Yeah, it takes 7 kilos of grain to make 1 kilo of beef, 4.5 kilos to 1 kilo of pork, and 2 kilos to 1
Well, in the water,
poultry.
it's, do you know that conversion?
And the water is huge
Hundreds
as well.
of liters.
Yeah, I don't know the exact conversion, but that's one of the big drivers around some of these food tech companies that are getting funded is just the footprint of meat production, protein production.
Yeah. So I think your point is right. I mean, telling everybody to become meat-free and vegetarian would be a difficult cultural change. But at the same time, we are facing this issue that if you look at right now, there's by 2030, there'll be a 30% increase in protein consumption in China, Southeast Asia, due to the fact of moving up from pulses and grains to further processed foods into proteins. Most of it is in chicken, but still, can it be sustainable? And that's going to be the challenge we're all going to face, absolutely.
A reduction on the to use ethanol from corn, for example. We mix the oil with ethanol, and we produce and we have gas, right? And for that reason, we are reducing the CO2 emissions and so forth. Maybe it will be an easier way to mix soybeans or other
right.
cereals in order to have a balanced processed meat supply chain or products. So maybe in that area it will be easier to
yeah, right now we're not facing the issue because we produce more calories than we consume as a globe. A lot of it, the waste issue is one big, we're 50 million tons of food is wasted in the US every year, and you take that globally, it's huge. So the issue is going to be over the course of the next 30 years is we're going to have to either do social engineering, technology engineering, bioengineering. One of those engineerings is going to have to help us fix it, because if we're on the path we're on now, it's not going to work. So, another question.
So we have one question in the back over there, the gentleman with the glasses.
So I really appreciate the quality of the discourse this evening, and I think it's fantastic. But going back to one of the initial comments that Dave made, yes, we'll have another 2 billion people, 2.5 billion people in a couple of decades. They're all in sub-Saharan Africa. So it's not the quality of leadership, it's the quantity of leadership. And how do each of you think you can take what you found and you discovered and you think and multiply that 1,000, 100,000 times?
I can start. So moving technology into Africa is happening. The pace is not as rapid as some would like. There's a project called WEMA, Water Efficient Maize for Africa, that the Gates Foundation and the Buffett Foundation, Monsanto, and a few other ag companies have invested in, and we are developing hybrids that are bred for sub-Saharan Africa. So these are corn plants that don't look a lot like corn in Iowa, but are able to yield under the types of conditions and the traits. Some of the traits, drought tolerance and insect resistance, are being moved as the regulatory platforms emerge. What is happening there is the enablement of the communities to be self-directed in the adoption of the technology. These are breeders that are educated in Africa, breed the varieties in Africa using assistance from the sort of first world in the data analytics and training, but are able to develop these sustainable agricultural systems on the ground, not imposed externally. When you look at the type of population growth they're predicting for Africa, and given some of the climate change predictions, it's really challenging to see how those needs are going to be met. But I think some people, there's sort of maybe a myth that the types of technologies we're talking about are very first world and only large farmers in the I states use them, and that's not true. The adoption is global, as I said, it's 90% of the farmers growing biotech crops are in the developing world. They may be smallholder farmers, but they have cell phones. These network systems are coming up. They are teaching each other. They're using the analytics that are being used in the first world. Can the pace keep up? Is the pace going to be there to solve this before there is a major crisis? We can only hope. And one of the issues that is, and I'll just put it out there on the table, the regulatory process to get these traits approved is one of the barriers when you talk about reiterating the improvement of these crops. We're basically having to go through a process that looks like releasing a drug on the market in terms of the cost and time frames. And these are products that have been shown to be safe, have been on the market for years, and the activities of the organizations that oppose this technology are putting up barriers globally. And I think one of the greatest threats to having the appropriate technology be on the ground where it's needed is this some of these regulatory processes that are completely disproportionate with the risk.
Yeah, actually, I'll comment on this as well. So one of the things that we did very early on is we adopted an open source model. We are actually going to fully open source our technology because we actually believe that in places like Africa, what you're referring to, they're going to need the most advanced solution, not the cheapest solution for poor countries. And so we created this initiative that we call Open Water, and we partnered with an organization called Partners in Health, which is one of the most successful global health organizations in the world. And so we're actually going to work with them to deploy this technology in places like Africa. And we're also going to try and encourage Fortune 500 companies to also adopt an open source model where they actually understand that contributing this technology can actually benefit them in the end, companies like GE and maybe even Monsanto, but that there's a real benefit that can be gained by getting this technology into the hands of other entrepreneurs and technologists in places like Africa. I mean, we certainly can't have a footprint everywhere in the world, but we can get our technology out there and do as much as we can to enable other entrepreneurs to adopt it.
Okay. I'll add, on the best part about data science is the things that we do here are very intense and advanced, but math is really portable, right? Once you figure out the relationship between weather and land and plants and what to expect, it can be modeled, and models are very portable. The question is, what are you going to do with them? How do you transfer that into knowledge so that they can make progress? Deployment and getting it into people's hands is far more difficult than creating the solution.
Well, think about the amount of data that you're collecting now. I mean, as you said, it's not the data, it's going to be the algorithms that come out of the data, and the algorithms being deployed into places that are, could be put on a mobile phone. Yeah. So they could be going to smaller farmers and small lots, et cetera.
Over here in the fourth row, please.
What about edible protein that's grown in a lab? And I've heard that that's been test marketed. What do you know about that?
I think I heard that the first hamburger cost $300,000
well, yeah,
or so to make.
The price is going down on edible protein. What I'm more interested in is the non-meat protein, insect proteins, which are now really hitting the market. If you look at the food nutrition conferences, they're all dealing with cricket flour and other types of insect proteins that are going to give the protein contents and then being used in bakery items and everything else. I think eventually we'll have some sort of a lab-grown meat. I just don't know, how expensive it'll be and whether it's going to have the taste and mouthfeel that you want.
Looking across the crowd, I might have an acceptance issue.
I think we may.
When you said cricket meat.
Yeah.
Third row here.
I think Virginia may have touched on this, but in the election year, I'm wondering if there are changes in U.S. foreign or domestic policy or proposed legislation that you think can move the needle in this area?
Good question. So what type of legislation or something that the government can do to help accelerate what we know needs to be done?
So funding for science.
Funding for
Funding for
science.
science, STEM education. We have got to educate the next generation of scientists across the board that are going to be continuing to develop solutions that absolutely nothing else will matter if we're not funding science.
I think some of the current subsidies we're giving to crops and farmers that are not necessarily efficient need to be looked at so that we can get to a much more efficient and better system as well. We tend to pay people for not growing. So. Any others?
I would agree with the comment on science. I think funding R&D is a big part of it. There's a big gap right now when it comes to getting these early stage, high risk technologies into the marketplace. And you may have seen the announcement that Bill Gates made recently about the Breakthrough Energy Coalition. But I mean, he's addressing exactly that issue: is how do you actually fund these technologies before they're really ready for prime time? And so I think if we can sort of follow his lead and tap into the government to actually match R&D funding, I think that'll have a big impact.
Okay.
And I would say it is those policies that incent bad behavior,
yes.
right? That at a farm level, whether it's buying, overcapitalizing, or using too much land, we have to let the economics drive efficiency and change behavior. And then the other pivot is around science, both from an investment and partnership. Our ag department, we have to be very scientific driven. We have to be on this future, same page, and they have to exhibit that as an organization.
Water question here.
Water pricing?
Water pricing is a big one.
So fair water pricing?
The other thing that Israel proved is that the price signal is by far the strongest incentive. I think people save on average maybe 5 to 10% of the water if there's no pricing signal. When there is a pricing signal, they save 2 to 3 times the amount of water.
Okay. So again, the subsidies and the types of structures there.
Over here, yeah, fourth row.
This is kind of a detour, but very much in farming. There was a TED Talk a while back by a man named Alan Savory, who strangely is advocating massive herds of animals, tightly clumped and migrating frequently, which is actually reversing desertification. And that's being used like in Missouri. I saw some things where they're moving cattle a quarter acre at a time instead of leaving them on a whole pasture. Do any of you know about it? And can you comment on it?
Well, I was just out at a feedlot with 67,000 head of cattle where they take them out onto land. And the problem there is that the cattle tend to decimate the land as they go through it. So, hey. Oh, I see. So they're using them to basically eat up the, after the agricultural equipment goes through and you've got all the stalks and everything, they go through to eat that.
They're mimicking what used to be in the Great Plains before we got here, where there are huge herds that eat, defecate, trample, and have to move. And then there's no need to burn, but that is now mulch, and so it increases the biomass. I mean, it sounds fascinating and very hopeful, but I'd love to hear somebody who knows about it.
Well, I'll have to watch that TED Talk, I guess, yeah.
Third row here.
It certainly sounds like there's a lot of design thinking that goes into all of your products. Could you speak a little bit more about designing products for the farmers children, the migrant labor that's working in the farms? Thank you.
I'll take a shot at that.
Yeah.
So I think if you're talking on a UX standpoint, I mean, the best part is we don't have to figure out what they use. They use, iPhone, Samsung, Android tablets, right? That's how it's amazing how that's been adopted in farming. And good news is they're no different than the rest of the consuming public. So thinking about what they see, it's really interesting in the design that it has to be, very simple kind of dashboard, right? What do I care about? And I think in everything we talked about usually, whether little farmer or big farmer, economics,
right? How am I doing? Will I farm next year? So there's that simplicity, but then, you know, I think you just take the best ideas from, you know, all other UX designers that humans use. Farmers are looking for very similar things. So things that we've looked at are, you know, trading platforms, and, you know, they want technicality, but they also want simplicity.
No, I can't really add to that.
I mean, from my perspective, obviously we're in hardware, not software, but design is super important. From our standpoint, it's really about automation, right? If you're going to have a system out there producing water, it needs to be fully automated. It can't require multiple chemical engineers to run it and service it. So we work very hard on creating systems that really just need to be serviced every once in a while. And for the most part, when the sun comes up, the solar array tracks the sun, it produces water, it stores heat even to actually run at night, and really doesn't require much human intervention.
Okay, good, thank you.
Over there in the middle, yeah.
Thank you for your great discussion. I worked for Ministry of Agriculture in Japan, and then I think it's true that technical development is necessary for food security. But on the other hand, the biggest demander is in developing country. So they can't afford to buy that technical development, or at least it takes a lot of time. So thinking about that, the reality, do you think still the technical development is enough, sufficient, or are there any necessity of public policy, like food aid or food storage? If so, what is the most important public policy, do you think?
So for developing countries, if technology is not going to be as accessible, are there public policy issues that are also have to be addressed as well?
But I think we've already talked about the things that do scale, and genetics do,
Yes.
and data does. And I think, yes, you wouldn't expect a smallholder farmer to have a John Deere tractor that's you know, combine that's harvesting 12 rows. And so I think the technology needs are different, and I don't see necessarily a trend towards trying to move inappropriate technology into the developing world. And you know, even smallholder farmers are very savvy. They're entrepreneurial. They have to be, and I think they can make. As far as how public policy affects that, I can't really speak to that, but farmers will adopt the right technology if it's made available and can be done with you know, some sort of, you know, really local control, and we see it happening.
I would say that the policy, you know, you want to build a system where they can adopt and sustain, right? Aid never seems to work out and hasn't for a long time. I mean, it's a Band-Aid. So you're building a system that works, in policy in a country, acceptance, registrations, and infrastructure, right? Basic infrastructure. Even if you think of technology about cellular infrastructure, how do they design policies so that that's possible? Then it allows the technologies to show up. If nothing gets registered, or the infrastructure's not there, or they're concerned about a new technology coming in, then most certainly it can't get adopted, and that's usually the friction. So policies need to be about big decisions of acceptance and infrastructure.
There's also a huge amount of innovation going into just penetration models. So, you know, for example, with solar in places like Africa, you can actually deploy a solar array where people can get the power they need just by sending a text message on their cell phone. So it's a system that can actually service a huge number of people, and you can finance the system by having lots of different parties be able to use it at the same time.
Yeah, it's almost a combination of free market with social media technology. I mean, the examples of the farmers trading best practices over a mobile phone, or the one about the coffee growers being able to sell the product, you know, on the internet before they actually have to physically move it. I mean, those are all going to free up a lot more better use of capital as well, or limited capital.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Please join me in thanking the panelists. Have a good night.